are about a dozen appellants to this decision. I'm part of one of those, Environment Hamilton. Hamiltonians for Progressive Development is the second one, and its chair is here tonight, Martin Norris. The rest of them are pretty much all landowners who own land inside or who would like to own land inside. That is, they own land that has not been included, but they would like to include it. So the process is a convoluted one to some extent, but they are certainly enthusiastic, as Jen pointed out, about getting inside the urban boundary, because getting in the urban boundary is essentially, in terms of land development, winning the lottery. If you're a farmer and you want to buy some land, if you pay more than $6,000 an acre, you're probably not doing your accounting properly because you're not going to make any money. So farmland runs in that range. Once it comes in the urban boundary, in fact, the minute it comes in the urban boundary, the price exceeds $40,000 an acre. Because once it's in the urban boundary, it then becomes something which the city has made a commitment to providing water and sewers and other services. If you're not inside the urban boundary, you're on wells and septic systems, your possibilities of development are limited, and they're limited even more by provincial rules, which basically say agricultural land should be protected and you can't convert it to housing without, except in very small exceptions, and unless you get it inside the urban boundaries. So, what I thought.
Before you keep going,
yeah.
Can everybody hear him okay? Because we do have mics if there's some audibility issues.
If you find that you're not hearing me, just throw up a hand and I will try and catch you in. Poor Larry has gotten to go second here, and that may be a good idea, but you got to sort of jump in and cut me off because I could go. I did one of these a little while ago and I went for an hour and a half. Yes, okay,
I'm not
good.
afraid to use it.
Okay, so we've got a map up here just to give you an idea of where it is and how big it is. The red blob is the Aerotropolis, the urban boundary expansion. It's actually composed of 3 parts, and I'll go into that. One of them is the airport itself, which is not currently in the urban boundary. Most of it is the Airport Employment Growth District, and about 500 acres is the area that the city wants designated for future expansion of our airport. And I've also put on this map, and I can see if I can get this, there we go. If you go down into this area here, you see STP, and I've marked that on there just to show you where the water and sewer services for the city are located, because in order to service this area, we do need to construct both a trunk sewer and a trunk water line, and it's about 25 kilometers. They don't go as the crow flies, they'll go up Centennial and across through rural land to get there. So let me just see if I can make this thing go forward. There we go. This is a little more detailed picture, and this shows the original plan that the city had for the Aerotropolis size. The portion along the south side, along here, along the west side basically of Highway 6, wasn't recommended for inclusion, but there are landowners within there trying to get in. So the actual final boundary will only be decided by the Ontario Municipal Board. And you can see that this is not a residential area. This is a rural area. So the residential, you see the streets around it, and the boundaries here: Garner Road, Fiddler's Green, White Church, Upper James, and 20 Road. And Mount Hope is actually excluded from it. It's down in the corner. I hate these things that don't have mice with them. Not used to laptops. This thing is Mount Hope down here. Okay. In terms of its ecology, its ecological features, it's the headwaters of 4 streams. That essentially the airport is located on the highest point of land between Lake Erie and Lake Ontario, and the highest point of land in Hamilton as a result. So everybody is downstream of the airport. That's significant because we've had a significant contamination problem that's been identified coming from the airport. In fact, there's 3 of them, but there's one that's gotten a fair bit of prominence in the last year and is now involved with a multi-million-dollar cleanup process, which is perfluorooctane sulfonate, a chemical that's, let's go back, that's used in firefighting, a flame retardant, and used in aircraft firefighting, aircraft foam, the foam that's used in firefighting. And immense amounts of it appear to have been used on a fire suppression practice pad just to the west of the airport. I've circled the location. And it has been draining into the Welland River system. And as a result, it's contaminated Lake Nyapanko, which is the Binbrook Reservoir. Not to the extent that you can't swim in it because the concentrations of water are pretty low, but in the organisms that live there, and particularly in turtles and fish, the contamination is extremely high. And in fact, Hamilton has the most contaminated carp in the world for PFAS, and they don't live in Hamilton Harbor. They live in Lake Nyapanko. So this chemical is associated with, it was voluntarily taken out of production by 3M in 2002. It's been identified as part of the Stockholm Convention, the Dirty Dozen, international restrictions on chemicals. Its import into Canada has largely been stopped. And much of the early studies were done around the issues of, were done by the industry itself, and they didn't tend to find a whole lot of health problems, but the concern was that it was identified as turning up in everybody. It's bioaccumulative and bioconcentrating. So once it gets in, it's hard to get out, and it builds up through the food chain, and humans, of course, are very close to the top of the food chain. We're at the top of the food chain. There isn't many organisms that eat us, but there are a couple around in the wild here and there. So this chemical has been flowing off the airport for some time, and it's contaminated the Welland River. There's also de-icing fluids, propylene glycol, which has been coming off the airport in a different part of the airport, apparently, which the Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority has been complaining about since the late 90s, and doesn't believe that has been completely sorted out. And then in the investigations over this PFAS material, there was also another chemical identified, which is only found in aircraft hydraulic fluid. And that likely is coming again from a third source somewhere in the airport, unknown at this point. Now, as I said, this is headwaters for 4 streams. So the Welland is the one that you see in the lower part, off to the left, and off to my left, off to your right. Off to your left, is Big Creek, which flows into the Grand River. So the Grand River Conservation Authority is involved. Up in the top left-hand corner is Sulphur Springs Creek, which flows into Hamilton Harbor, so the Hamilton Conservation Authority is involved. And then 20 Mile Creek and the Welland River occupy most of this area, and they both flow, are under the jurisdiction of the Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority. 20 Mile Creek empties into Lake Ontario at Grimsby, is something I correct there? Or is it further down? Anyway, and the Welland River goes all the way to the Niagara River. So these maps are all from city studies that were associated with the Aerotropolis, the AEGD. This is the significant groundwater recharge areas. The PFAS source, unfortunately, is within those, on the edge of it. It is in the groundwater. That's been confirmed. It's not clear how far it's gone. There's been some well testing at this point. They think the only two wells were contaminated, and those were likely contaminated from surface sources. But if it's in the groundwater, then there's obviously the possibility that it's going to continue to migrate, and it's going to be very difficult to get out. And these are some terrestrial resources. The dark purple is significant woodlots. The greens, there's a greenbelt area to the south of the airport, down along through here, along Highway 6. That's the greenbelt area. And then there are some wetlands in there and the major stream corridors and so on. Works out to about 30% of the area is ecologically significant and not available, not permitted for development. The land is all designated prime agricultural land. This is from the city's regional official plan, and that means class 1, 2, 3, or 4. And basically, pretty much everything outside the urban boundary in Hamilton, and much of what's inside used to be, is prime agricultural land. So there are some restrictions on what you can develop, and one of the restrictions from the province is you can't develop on prime agricultural land unless you can show that you have to, and that you don't have any other choices. So that's one of the hurdles or obstacles that this project has to get past. The current status of this, yes?
So that means the expansion that they're asking for goes against places to grow?
We would certainly argue it goes against places to grow in many respects. In fact, most of the appeal that was launched by Environment Hamilton simply quotes provincial documents, provincial policy statement, provincial places to grow, and the official plans that are already in place for the region and for the former municipalities that still exist. So it was approved by council 8 days before the 2010 election by a 14-2 vote. The two votes against it were McCaddy and Bertina. The appeals I've talked a bit about. Beginning on May 22nd, we're going to see the first of the hearings. And what the city has asked the Ontario Municipal Board to do is do a threshold hearing. The question that the board is being asked to determine is, does an earlier decision with respect to this area, and I'll talk a little bit about how we got there, does that mean that residential development and commercial retail development are not permitted inside this area? And that's the city's position. Their position is this whole area should be set aside for industrial use, and that residential growth and commercial retail should not be allowed to occur in there. Obviously, that's not the position of those who are appealing this from the landowner side. They are all arguing for that their lands are really much better suited to have residential or commercial retail or a mix thereof. So that hearing is scheduled for 9 days in May and June, and we're not actually, Environment Hamilton is not taking a very active role in that, because that question is not the key question that we're worried about. We don't think this thing should happen at all, and as a result, that is a question that will be dealt with after the first one is decided. And the decision there may have some impact on how that plays out. So the main hearings will, as far as we're concerned, won't take place until at least the fall, maybe beyond that.
Well, if you're not concerned, if your angle is it shouldn't happen at all, shouldn't that also be a, because what I'm thinking of is the city doesn't get the first thing, then it's like we go with plan B, we didn't get plan A. Plan B built houses. It looks like they're set on development out there, whether they get their first stream or they get the second one.
That's our suspicion is that the actual game here is to convert this eventually to residential. But in order to justify an urban boundary expansion under places to grow, under the new provincial planning legislation that was adopted the same year that this was pushed through initially in 2005, you can't do an urban boundary expansion unless you're a municipality and unless you can prove that you need to do this. So the city is of the view, and I think they're correct in this, that they have no hope of convincing anyone that they have a need for more land for residential development. There's oodles of that within the city at this point. The city does have a plan to go for residential development expansion, but not until the mid-2020s, and that's in the Old Friday area. So if you get a ruling, for example, that residential is allowed here, one possibility is the city will simply say, we don't want to be part of this. We don't want to proceed. So we're not going to do this. because we don't want residential to happen there. But if there's an argument that residential can be permitted within it, then the next stage hurdle that anybody who wants to do that has to get over is to show that in fact that this should take priority over lands that are already inside the urban boundary, or over other areas that are competing for the right to be the area of expansion for residential growth. One of them being the Ephrata area, the other one being the 20 Road area. And in fact, in this hearing that's coming up, the city has invited those landowners to jump in and support the city's position. So this is becoming a bit of a dog's breakfast in the sense that there's probably going to be 15 to 20 lawyers involved in the hearings that are coming up starting in May. And at the end of the day, whatever that decision is, it doesn't determine that this is going to go ahead, but it will have some impact potentially on the positions of various players. I hope that makes sense. What Jen was talking about the community council being approached to participate is individuals and organizations can seek status within this hearing as participants. You could seek status as a party as well, but to be a party you need a lawyer, you need to spend some money. As a participant you can simply come and make a statement of your views. And Environment Hamilton is certainly encouraging people to do that. There's about 40 people, either as individuals or organizations, that signed up at the February 15th pre-hearing. The option is still open till at least April 16th, and it may be open beyond that.
Can, there are only 2 councillors that were against it, but can those councillors present their views, since it might have some more weight because they're actually part of the machine?
I'm not sure about that. Somebody may have more knowledge of the OMB than I do. I'm not sure whether councils ever do that. Usually what happens is once a vote is taken, the council takes all the councillors take the position, well, that's the city's position, so I shouldn't go around making statements in opposition to that position.
Yeah, that would be my understanding working for regional government, that once that's been approved.
And then, like I say, the main hearings are going to be a little piece in the distance, and we're not sure when that's actually going to start.
Where would the list of participants be available? Is that online? Have you signed up?
We're working on getting it online on a couple of websites. There is the OMB decision, I think, is now probably online. So the decision from the February 15th has a list of all those participants.
So is the decision that it's come down to, it's a given that at least the amount strictly for the original boundary lines, the fait accompli, and it's just the expansion? Or is there still room for argument that it does go against places to grow and there's no economic argument that makes sense that needs that industrial expansion?
The Ontario Municipal Board hearings are de novo, so they start over.
They start from scratch.
Okay, they start from scratch. Any of this can change. The whole thing can be tossed out. The boundaries can be changed. Who's in, who's out can be changed. What they can do there can be changed. Basically, it's all wide open within the hearings process.
So a sustainable agricultural argument would play into that.
Would certainly play into that, yes, for sure. This map is, oh, yeah.
Clear on the OMB, could, if the case was made that it was not within the guidelines of places to grow, is the OMB actually going to overturn the provincial policy?
Well, the argument that goes on within the Ontario Municipal Board, and that the process here is the Ontario Municipal Board is the interpreter of provincial policy. They are supposed to uphold provincial policy as they understand it. We're certainly going to be arguing that this violates provincial policy in a whole string of ways, and the city will be arguing the opposite. Yeah?
Is much of the land being farmed now, and how many farms are we talking about?
I don't know how many farms. You can sort of see from this what the land breakout is here. A good portion of this is being farmed at this point. As I said, about 30% of it is ecologically significant, so it's woodlots and wetlands and that sort of thing. The agricultural component and how that plays into this, is, of course, tied up with what's the financial impact of this. So if I'm a farmer and I own 50 acres in here, this is my retirement. I could sell it as a farm for $6,000 an acre, and maybe I can live on that, or I can sell it inside the urban boundary for 40 an acre. So there's certainly some pressure on the farming community that exists there to support this. However, if you look at the land, the information that's coming out through the Ontario Municipal Board hearing, a substantial portion of these lands have already been purchased by those who are interested in development rather than farming. And it's likely that there are options on much of the rest. So for example, there's a piece of land, let's see if I can get this thing to do something here. There we go. Just along here, not that one, but just below there, right in there, is a piece of land that the city just purchased. It was bought in 1994 by a man named George Chevallo. Many of you will know who George is. He was the greatest Canadian boxer in history, the only man who ever went 10 rounds with Muhammad Ali without getting knocked down. Although he didn't win that fight. So Chevallo bought that land, 47 acres, for $5,100 an acre in 1994. He sold it last summer to the city for $70,000 an acre. Now that land is scheduled, the hatched area on this map is the area that's designated for airport expansion. And that particular piece of land, the city wanted to get its hands on because there's some hope they have that the airport will airport economics will justify building a new runway or an extension of the existing runway into that piece of land. So, that's one of the pieces that we know about.
I hear things like this and I think to myself, well, the city's obviously counting their chickens before they're hatched. They haven't won this thing, but they're buying up land at those prices that, to me, it just seems so irresponsible to be purchasing land and you don't have a decision yet.
Well, the justification for this particular piece of land is that this is required for airport expansion. So they would probably feel more confident that they could win a case that at least this piece of land should be allowed for airport expansion. And in fact, the airport at this point is not in the urban boundary. But the construction has gone on anyway, and one of the runways was extended in the 80s and so on. So I don't think that's necessarily an obstacle. But it does mean that there's a fair investment that the city has made to on that particular piece of land. Worked out to about $3 million, I believe.
So in terms of selling agricultural land, my understanding that if it was still within an area that fits outside the urban boundary, you could only then sell it to remain agricultural land. So if they would already have sold things, I assume it's under the premise it would stay agricultural land until it becomes designated as part of this expansion.
Yeah, certainly by the provincial rules. The areas that are owned by appellants are outlined in yellow. And I hope that's clear on there, but I think it is. The airport is also outlined in yellow, but ignore that. And the hatched area, you have to get all the way around. So there's pieces down lower here. I'm just going to move this thing, I think. This is one which wants in. There's another one up here that wants in. There's others strung along Garner Road. Particularly along 20 Road, there's a group of, they're called the 20 Road Landowners West, and they're have several hundred acres that they want residential, and then there are some smaller pieces in various places. This piece down here is one of the ones that an appellant is involved in, and the objective there may be to force the city to buy that land. Because in designating that hatched area as airport expansion, period, The landowners are arguing, you have just taken away my right to do something with my land. The only thing I can now do it, the only person that I can sell it to is you. So under a principle called the Nepean principle established in earlier OMB cases, that means you have to buy it. And the city initially agreed with that argument with respect to a 50-acre parcel, which is the Wasserman property. It's over on Upper James, and it's also outlined in yellow. And then, for some reason, a couple of months ago, rescinded their position and have decided that they're going to fight that at the OMB. 530 acres, $70,000 an acre, you do the math. That's a lot of money that the city may have committed itself to spending in order to push this forward in that aspect. So that's certainly one of the things that we're concerned about. But this gives you an idea of some of the landowners that are involved in terms of actually appealing this. Let's see what else I've got on there. A major issue involved in this, if you look at that piece of land, it is 4,500 acres. The Bayfront industrial area, both the Bayfront portion and the portion that's called the East Hamilton industrial area, which is adjacent to it, combined is a little under 3,800 acres. So we're talking about an area that is bigger than our old industrial core. It's about the same size as Hamilton Harbor. So we're talking a very large piece of land being added to the urban boundary. It's the largest that we've been able to identify that's ever occurred in Hamilton history. Unless you want to count amalgamation, which was another ball of wax one came into it. So one of our arguments is that if you need land for industrial development, and the city's argument is that it needs it, then the first place you should look, and this is what the province also says, is at your existing industrial lands, and is there any availability there? So the city did a study of that, and they came back and said, of that 3,800 acres, 47 acres is available between now and 2031, which is the planning period we're talking about. I've cycled down Burlington Street. I'm sure all of you have probably at some point. If you believe that there's only less than 2%, 1.5% of that land available, you've got different eyesight than I do. It seems to me that that's silly, but the way in which they did their calculation is they determined what was available on a very narrow definition of, is the land derelict and not paying taxes. If they applied that to the Aerotropolis, we wouldn't have anything in the Aerotropolis because it's all paying taxes. And when they were asked about availability, they said, well, that's a subjective thing, underutilized and possibly available. That's subjective, we don't know.
Another thing that they started doing was also changing the definition of industrial and calling some of it residential in order to then reduce the number. And of course, no one's going to start building houses on Burlington Street up in front of the Pasco. So they started.
Yeah, where that happened in particular,
so that they could reduce the number and say, well, we don't have any industrial land.
Where that happened in particular is, in order to do this kind of an expansion, if you go through the process here that the province has laid out, you must do what's called a municipal comprehensive review to determine how much land you have and how much land you need, and whether there's a difference, and then the difference is your justification for how much you can argue you need to add. So the process that they went through identified that they have a shortage of available industrial land to accommodate the population growth that's anticipated between now and 2031. And that population growth is fanciful, and I can talk a little bit about that, but everybody has admitted that it's fanciful, but this thing is proceeding on the basis of that population number, which would see Hamilton go from the current 520,000 to 660,000 in the next 20 years, by 2031. But anyway, so that's how they did the calculation. The conclusion of that study was, we have a shortage, so we shouldn't give up any industrial land that we have now, and we should add some more. And the Aerotropolis is the piece that they wanted to add. The council overruled that and said there's 4 pieces of land that we already have in the urban boundary that are industrial that we don't want to use for industrial. There's 3 Walmarts that want to come in here, or 2 Walmarts that want to come in here, and there's 2 more big box complexes that want that land. So we'll convert it. So one of them was the Walmart on Centennial at QEW. Another one is the Walmart plan for Winona Road at the QEW. A third one is up in Ancaster at Shavers Corners. I mean, it's opposite some commercial there now. And the 4th one, Shaver and Wilson. And the 4th one is on Stone Church. So that all got converted, and then that, of course, increased the amount of land that was required according to the calculations at the airport. So the city's position is outlined in a couple of quotes here that I've taken from city officials that spoke to the issue of availability of brownfields. It essentially is that companies don't want to go on brownfields. I mean, we're talking mainly 70% of the land in the Aerotropolis is expected to be used by the city for warehousing, trucking, or wholesale trade. All of which seem logically well suited to go down on Burlington Street on lands that are available there. But their argument is that companies don't want to do that, that it's a competitive environment, and the only way that we can attract somebody to Hamilton is offer them greenfield sites that they don't have to worry about any previous contamination, although contamination rules generally are not very stringent with respect to putting industrial development on existing industrial land. Yeah.
Is there any interest in the companies coming in?
There isn't been anything identified about companies being interested in coming in. Let me see if I've got this map is useful. This is the current employment lands or industrial lands, designated lands in Hamilton before the Aerotropolis. And one of them, as you see at the bottom there, is the Airport Business Park. So we have a business park. It's about 250 acres. It was set up in 1992. 20 years later, it has not attracted a single entrepreneur. It remains 93% empty. And they just went through an Ontario Municipal Board hearing over a portion of those lands that a local church owns and wanted to set up a church conference center. And the city opposed that on the basis that one of the bases was that would convince industry not to locate there because they wouldn't want to locate near the church lands. And they had a number of other reasons that this was supposed to be employment land and so on, because that's where they want to go with this. The Ontario Municipal Board ruled in favor of the church, and part of its thing part of the decision pointed out that this land had been sitting for 20 years, designated as industrial and not used for that purpose.
Couldn't that be a strong basis to argue not expanding? I mean,
well,
this is sort of a test drive.
It's interesting.
What?
It is interesting because in the decision, the OMB officer, he didn't say the Aerotropolis is a stupid idea. What he said was, for some reason, having never attracted an entrepreneur to this business park, they decided to increase its size by 875%. That was it. It was just a quiet comment, but that's, yeah.
Yeah, that's why I'm wondering, like, it's so bizarre that does it even matter to try and understand whatever logic, there obviously wasn't any to make this decision. And, I mean, there's something we don't know about, it would seem, or that council would have gone to that strong a majority, but is it to the, I guess it's the logic one would hope the OMB was.
Let me try to suggest what I think may be going on here. One of the things with respect to the Airport Business Park is it's privately owned. And we have a lot of greenfield business parks in Hamilton. The North Glenbrook Business Park is one, Ancaster Business Park, Stony Creek Business Park. And the development there has been much slower than what the city expected it would be, although generally we're not attracting a lot of new businesses, industries to Hamilton. But one of the reasons that that development has been slow is because the lands are privately owned. And if you're a private owner of a piece of land in a business park that's been designated industrial, your fondest hope is that you can get it redesignated residentially, which is the same reason why these various appellants are before the Ontario Municipal Board in this hearing. Because residential development is about 4 times as lucrative as industrial development.
So this is just an end run to get around, so that eventually, hopefully, you can get around places to grow, by pretending you want it as industrial for now, and then when it shows there's actually no need for that, but you've already built the additional infrastructure, put water, etc. in there, you'll say, well then, you've ruined the agricultural land, you might as well put residential.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the other potential explanation here. We've got, one is that if you have problems attracting industrial development to your current business parks, and we have 1,800 acres of greenfield parks available, vacant at this point. So it's not a matter that we've run out of greenfield sites. There's lots of those available, and the current rate of taking those up, occupation is such that there was a good 20-year supply there. But in addition to that, because those lands aren't being used, then if you add a bunch more, then you hope perhaps that somebody in there will actually agree to sell their land to an industrial development, rather than hanging on to it in hopes that eventually it can be converted to residential. And that, I think, is one piece. The other piece that may explain why the city is proceeding this way in terms of a logic is that when this was originally passed by council, and this was under Mr. Gianni in 2005, and it was blocked by the Ontario Municipal Board, and they were forced to go back and go through a process of getting to the point we're at now. At that point, Places to Grow was just coming in. The Greenbelt had just been